Are you like me? You were super excited to watch Amazon's The Rings of Power, and then you did? And after the vague feeling of having your intelligence insulted, you wanted a Karen Silkwood style shower to cleanse yourself? I saw this comment that said the real heroes of this show are the reviewers who persevered all 8 episodes. So this is my thank you to those YouTubers who have articulated my feelings far better than I ever could.
Galadriel in Rings of Power should have been an easy sell. How did Amazon snatch defeat from the jaws of victory? And how did
About the billion-dollar affront to our collective intelligence, the Rings of Power. The screenwriting process for the Rings of Power is an elaborate one. First, the writers develop a draft Next, the draft is circulated among the homeless community, where the warm, splattered diarrhea of their most unwashed is smeared over the paper with an extra coating of fecal filth added from the lavatory at a truck stop.
And I would love it if Season 2 was good. I have virtually no faith that Season 2 will be good.
I feel safe in saying this show is an empty husk. A shell of a great intellectual property, using its namesake to draw in an audience without delivering anything worth watching. It wants to emulate Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films in every way, but also desires to stand on its own, and fails spectacularly at accomplishing either.
I don't know about you, but I'm having a great time watching Rings of Power. That is one of the best comedy shows on TV right now.
However, The Rings of Power is not for everyone. It's not for true fans of the source material. It's not for discerning critics or even moderately intelligent fantasy watchers. It's garbage made for an audience who probably aren't even really watching.
No, this show is so terrible that if you take away everything that has to do with Lord of the Rings, you take away the brand, the cheap callbacks, and all the controversy surrounding its release, and all that you're left with is this unbelievably boring, lazy, snail-paced, yet still uneventful, overpriced, predictable excuse of a show.
Tolkien himself was not a fan of allegory, and yet this show has managed to work in the most ridiculous allegories that show the collective intelligence of the show's writers, which is to say, nil.
So weird, because again, the internal logic of the show is just not great. I don't know why the writers thought that was a good idea, or many of the things that they put in the script, the final script that we got. I'm not sure why they thought too much of that was that good, to be honest.
But The Rings of Power doesn't have much to do with Tolkien. So is there any hope for Season 2? No. Simply no. There is no power or magic in our world that can undo the 1,000 mistakes made in Season 1. I'm not excited for series.
One audience will be asked to wonder, who are all these people and why should I care? Look,
This show is a billion-dollar nightmare. A horrible, bland, disrespectful, corporatized piece of clumsy fan fiction that somehow manages to look both obnoxiously overproduced and shockingly cheap at the same time. Written by people with a Wikipedia summary understanding of the source material.
I have sat through 8 miserable, boring hours of Rings of Power, ranging in quality from the most debased levels of cringe-inducing garbage to somewhat watchable but ultimately always disappointing junk-grade imitation Tolkien. We can disagree on just how bad it is, but not on its fundamental awfulness.
Welcome and thank you for joining as we journey through all the plot holes from Season 1 of Rings of Power. And I can bet with you that in the end of this video, you'll be shocked with the amount of mistakes these writers made.
Alright, so I thought we'd talk a little bit today about The Rings of Power and attention to detail and why it matters, and why this show has essentially failed at some of the basic techniques used to make shows coherent.
I think we can conclusively say that the series was an absolute failure. And it pains me to say that the future doesn't look much brighter. So how did The Rings of Power go from one of the most anticipated fantasy series of this decade to one of its most resounding disappointments?
These idiots who created this show, not only can they not create their own 8-episode series to make sense, they break The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings that are supposed to come after. That is a special kind of talent, as they put it. Write a story that Tolkien never wrote. Well, you did that alright, didn't you?
For all the canon violations, the 2 most amazing things about Rings of Power are how boring it is and how cheap it looks. God, it's dull. The real name of this show should be Bored of the Rings. So effective at putting you to sleep, Amazon is about to be sued by the maker of Ambien.
Heck, an Amazon analyst said he fell asleep 3 times in the first 3 or 4 episodes. He couldn't finish it. It was so boring because nobody cares, because the little scenes don't invest us into any character, because the writing is stale and bland and over the top and at best junior college level writing.
But it's one I've really wanted to stick with because I've been fascinated about what they're doing with it. Unfortunately, this fascination isn't because I've been enjoying the show for the most part, more about how perplexed I've been with the writing and some of the creative choices.
There were a few times when I saw a Peter Jackson reference. Rather than the show making bank on my nostalgia, it just reminded me how much better those films are in the moments they're referencing. The writing. This kind of leads into another thing I thought was really uneven and at times downright bad. The writing.
This show is not allowed to have Lord of the Rings in front of it. I will never say the Lord of the Rings and then say the name of the show. I will.
Well, consider this. What if Rings of Power wasn't written by human writers at all? What if the script was actually AI generated?
It really is incredible how bad Rings of Power is. Like, not only is it boring, ugly, and uneventful, repetitive, and flat, it also seems to actively go out of its way to avoid becoming interesting or telling you anything about its characters. I didn't think I would see any.
So many people were so apathetic as to whether or not these people live or die. I've never seen so many people say they've been rooting so hard for a villain to win the story. You can tell the showrunners failed miserably in this respect.
Rings of Power has disavowed its heritage, it set aside Tolkien, it sought to use the works of better men to propagate its own modern and obsessively current ego. As such, it can fuck off to hell, and then it can carry on fucking.